And thanks for staying with Morning Live. Now, earlier this week, on Monday to be exact, we actually broadcast from the Desmond Tutu Refugee Reception Centre in Marabastad, where various allegations were made against Home Affairs officials who were supposed to man that facility, which offers documentation services to asylum seekers and refugees here in Gauteng, and of course from others who come here from across the country. Now, following the recent violence and looting in the province, hundreds of undocumented foreign nationals were arrested, raising concern over migration management in the country. So the Department of Home Affairs is here to give us their side of the story. And we're joined by the Director General, Mr. Thulani Mavuso. Thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you very much for having us.
So, as you saw on Monday, we actually went to the Desmond Tutu Refugee Reception Centre, and there was quite a litany of complaints about just the processes and procedures as they are carried out at that particular centre. But for you, just firstly, your response to the broadcast and what it highlighted.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Look, what we would like to respond in terms of the issues that you raised on that particular day is that South Africa has created a system of refugee management. And in that, we're seeking to ensure that we protect people who are vulnerable, who are persecuted from their countries of origin. So in 1998, when we created the system, obviously we envisaged that, because of stability in certain parts of the continent, there are certain few countries that have problems, that we will probably not even, receive more than, 5,000 asylum seekers on an annual basis. But what we saw is an increase after the creation of the system, that the number of people who are seeking asylum in South Africa were actually unprecedented. In 2008, we received over 207,000 applications. And in that, we then picked up is that there are people who actually were abusing the system, were not supposed to be in that particular asylum seeker management system. Because as South Africa, we subscribed and signatory to the Convention of the UN to protect people that are persecuted. But 95% of the applications that we adjudicate for asylum seekers is applications that do not qualify. A majority of them are manifestly unfounded, are abusive and fraudulent. So therefore, they clog the system, and that those who are vulnerable then therefore, are part and parcel now of this particular huge group, and we are not able to provide them with quicker service and service that is actually, provided in a dignified environment. The abuse, as I said, is as a result of economic downturn, in 2008, where you saw a lot of people moving to the south because of the economic crisis globally. So that's what we have seen over the years. And therefore, there's an expectation that we then expand the facilities, open more centers and open, more refugee reception officers, get more officials to be able to do that. It's quite impossible because the resources that we have really were designed for a system that will cater, statistically looking at the number of people that was expected, that's why we only had 5 refugee reception officers. On the issues of corruption, particularly in those centers, most of the activities that happen outside our perimeters obviously are not monitored. It's a public place where the police obviously have to ensure that the people that are committing those crimes, get nabbed and arrested. We do set up traps, obviously, when it comes to our officials, when people are saying that this particular individual is doing 1, 2, 3. We then set a trap, we arrest those people, which are our officials, but also if there are syndicates that operate outside, we also want the asylum seekers, and even in our front offices, that people must report to those. It's very easy to set up a trap because we call the individual to make a contact with that person, and then obviously we work with the hawks in most of those cases, and we arrest those people on a regular basis. But I don't think it's enough. That's something that we have acknowledged. But what I'm saying is that, as a Home Affairs department, where we operate in public spaces. You find an individual come into our office, and then an office manager say, "Why are you sitting here?" He will tell you that, "No, I'm waiting for someone." They can't chase them out because it's a public space. So inside the refugee center, we've put cameras there. Inside the refugee center, we've also created what we call an automated booking terminal, where new arrivals, they come and make their own bookings, where those who are still waiting for the decision to be made, they can do their renewal of the asylum seeker permit automatically. In most instances, the people who are corrupting the officials is those whose decisions have already been made and it's in the system. They can no longer renew because the decision to say you're a failed asylum seeker has already been made. So it means that person must actually leave the republic. So they therefore looking for a warm body to corrupt and pay because they know that they no longer qualify. And the question would say that it's not only the officials that are extorting money from people, but it's the people themselves who know that they are no longer supposed to be in the republic. So therefore the machine cannot be bribed.
So it's a two-way street.
It is a two-way street, and really those who are paying bribes, we need to deal with them. But secondly, the civil society organization must help us, that this system must be used by those who deserve. Civil society organizations are quick to blame government, but they are not quick to blame those who are abusing the system, because we in the UNHCR, we want to protect people who are vulnerable, who are being persecuted from countries of origin. And in South Africa, we've created that particular system.
Now, let's talk about, perhaps improving on the offering, because as you said, we saw this firsthand on Monday, those queues snaking from after 5 a.m. in the morning, thousands of people trying to get into that facility to somehow receive some form of service. So, and as you say, it would seem as though the majority of the people who actually come to the centers don't qualify anyway. So isn't there a way in which you could perhaps find some system that could weed out who should be there and who shouldn't be there?
Well, first of all, the people obviously arrive very early in the morning before the office is open. And it's a problem that we have been grappling with over the years, not only in the refugee center, even in our front offices where we service citizens. In one office in Marabastad, for an example, the homeless people, what they would do in the morning, they go in queue in front of our office. By the time you arrive, there's already 50 people in front of you because they're queuing to sell spaces. And when managers obviously try to intervene, again, it's a question, they are queuing in the pavement, not in the Office of Home Affairs, and then that's what they're doing. So we're trying to cap that. But on the issue of whether we would want to ensure that the people in the queue are the people who are deserving, unfortunately, in terms of our laws, the refugee legislation, we cannot deny any person who wants to make a refugee, an asylum seeker application. We first have to include before we exclude. So that is the reality that we are faced with. It is rather a very difficult one to manage because, as I said, there are those who take chances, just for the sake of trying to regularize themselves when they know they're not supposed to be in the country.
A part of the complaints were that the refugee reception centers in Cape Town and Port Elizabeth are not functional. Why not? Well,
that's, again, not a correct statement. Last year, we reopened the refugee reception office in East London, in Port Elizabeth. That's the one issue. The second issue is that the refugee reception office in Cape Town is operating but is not taking new applicants. Is renewing those who are already in the system who are still waiting for the Refugee Appeals Board to make a determination on their status. Part of the problem, obviously, we took the matter to court. We said to the court, part of the problem we are faced with Cape Town is that we have not received a single asylum seeker who came through the sea, to say that we are going to claim refuge in Cape Town. We all receive a majority of asylum seekers from the northern borders. That is why we wanted to ensure that all our refugee reception officers are in the northern borders. In Gauteng, we have one in Marabastad because we do have those who claim asylum who arrive by air, from different kinds of origins. So that is the challenge that we're having. So in Cape Town, we have found a new premises now because the court has instructed us to reopen that for new arrivals. Again, what I'm saying is that, we are opening it against our wish, because definitely we do not believe that you must have that center there, but we will comply with the court decision. We found a facility in Belleville, so we're busy now with the project to try and ensure that by end of December, that facility is opened.
We spoke to some asylum seekers who told us that they've been coming and trying to get their paperwork sorted for 15 years. One of the guys we spoke to from Burundi, and talks about endless frustrations and, keep getting a temporary permit. What would lead to that sort of result?
So what leads to that situation, as I said, is that in 2008, when we had a huge number of asylum seekers, so you had about 207,000. The following year was also over 200,000, right, in 2009. So you had over 440,000 asylum seeker applications. When 95% of the 440,000 gets rejected, the majority of them take the matter to the Refugee Appeals Board to say that the decision taken by the Refugee Status Determination Officer and the Standing Committee on Refugee Affairs is then challenged by these people. And when they challenge that particular decision, the Refugee Appeals Board, how it was designed, is that members of the board must hear each case when they sit as a quorum. Now, in this instance, if you have 5 members of the Refugee Appeals Board, if it's a very small board, it's about 5 members, and then they must hear it as a quorum. It means 3 of them must sit and hear the matter. Now, just imagine when you're sitting with over 200,000 appeals. So it means it will take you years and years to get to that person number 200,000 precisely. What we then did is that we went to Parliament and amended the legislation to say that at least members of the board must be able to hear the matter as individual members who are legally qualified and competent. So that has been passed in terms of the amendment of the legislation. Obviously, we have now asked the minister to approve the regulations so that if I can then decide to that I will appoint 100 members of the Refugee Appeals Board, at least I would know that each member can deal with certain number of cases. We can be able to clear the backlog, because those cases of that particular individual, which I saw, the brilliant guy, it's precisely fall in those categories of people who will keep on renewing the asylum seeker permit because we've not, the Refugee Appeals Board has not finalized the matter. It's no longer within the hands of the Refugee Reception Office, but is in the hands of the board, which, as I said, that was constrained by the legislation that required them to sit as a quorum.
So appreciate the clarity there. We are into news time, but I just have to ask you about the repatriation flight of Nigerian nationals, Peace Air, yesterday. If you could just give us an update on that situation.
Well, the flight left after about 14:25 yesterday. There were about 315, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on board. Out of that, we had about 184 who were declared undesirable because they were not in the country legally. So we've banned them for a period of 5 years. And also we had a mother who was a South African with 2 Nigerian children who wanted to live with them. Unfortunately, we could not allow her to leave because the papers were not correct. So we've been speaking to the Nigerian consulate to say that as we they do another repatriation, we need to do much more better planning in relation to those people who are leaving the Republic. Some of those who left after the 315, their documents were in order. They still had a right to be in the Republic, but they voluntarily decided to go back to their country of origin. And also, all what we are appealing to our embassies that are here is that we need to ensure that the citizens of the countries that we represent have got proper documents, because there's no reason as an ambassador that you would want your own citizens to violate laws of a country where you are being hosted as citizens of that particular country. Similarly with South Africans, we don't want South Africans to be illegal abroad.
But thank you so much for your time this morning. Director General in the Department of Home Affairs, Mr. Thulani Mavuso, speaking to us about the plight of refugees and asylum seekers, and also an update on the repatriation process. And with that, it's over to Leanne for the latest headline news.